As always. All right. Hello, welcome back to the Region 1 and 7 meeting for our second presentation. Storytelling as a research methodology from Dr. Ann Burkhardt, Defiance College McMaster Fellow, and I will let her continue on and introduce herself further and her project.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be with you today. I really love talking about this project. And so I always plan too much. I've been a teacher too long, so I always plan too much. So if I speed up really soon, it means it really wasn't important to start with. So storytelling as a research methodology. Here's some goals for our session, and I hope we can accomplish this. If you take a minute to read those to yourself. So you see the work ahead of us that I am going to be working with you to learn about a way to gather research about a local community, and one method that my group used, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so hopefully by the end, you'll be a little more knowledgeable about storytelling, ethnographic research, and grounded theory when you're trying to find out about communities. So the McMaster School for Advancing Humanity at Defiance College was established by the McMaster family. They were grads in the 40s, and they left us a lot of money to work on human suffering, to find ways to alleviate human suffering. And I have been involved with it since the beginning. I worked a couple years in Guatemala. I worked many years, 15, 16, 9 of them with my colleague Fred Coulter in Cambodia, and 2 years in the Eastside of Defiance working on this initiative. So in this McMaster model, when you're going to do this kind of research, it's specific in how it runs. So there's nothing without the community partners. And in Defiance, Ohio, my community partners were Vince Cantu of the Hebron Church and the mayor. And they're the ones, well, the mayor was the one who met with our president and got this whole project going. We met as the community members, and we established the goals of the project, and eventually we shared the results. This is the framework for the McMaster program, and hoping to educate students for global citizenship, responsible citizenship, but more importantly, to critically examine root causes of human suffering. And with this particular 2-year initiatives, we were looking at suffering in terms of marginalized individuals not being understood, and just being pushed to that east side and just stay there and leave us alone. We were looking at how did that impact people over the years, and how will it impact people in the future. Every community-based research project has goals. This took us forever. This took us weeks, because we had the city government, we had the college, and we have the most reasonable person, Vince Cantu at the Hebron Church. So we had to decide, what's our goal of this project? Pastor Cantu and our mayor were already working together to provide increased services, to provide increased attention to the east side. And so the mayor had been meeting with Vince Cantu at his church, Hebron Church, and met with over 100 people. Vince Cantu is considered a community leader in the east side. And some of their concerns were, we hardly have any sidewalks. They do have a playground now. Out of the initial meetings, the people were saying, can't we have a playground in our neighborhood? And they have a playground now. Why do we have to be the last people to have our garbage picked up? Why do we have to have the last to have our snow removed? Most like, why can't we have sidewalks? And so there was basic things they were asking for that every other neighborhood had. And so it is a huge project. So the mayor said, well, the McMaster School works with, which is a huge goal, alleviating human suffering. How can they work with the city? And so I'm big in baby steps, and we couldn't build a playground, we couldn't build buildings, and we certainly could not put sidewalks down. And so looking at the first step in this kind of a massive project is creating awareness. And so because it's higher ed, we had to call people in from Bowling Green to help us come up with this sentence. You know, a lot of blah, 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 blah to wordsmith this sentence. And what we came up with after weeks is to create an awareness of the rich cultural history of the East Side of Defiance, East Side community. And the reason being, hey, if enough people knew about the history and the heritage and the culture, and where did people come from originally? Where did these immigrants come from? Maybe through awareness, might there be some understanding and increased attention to this East Side neighborhood. This was my original group that I worked with on this project, but this was the methodology of how we went about this. We didn't do anything besides getting our community partners. In community-based research, you do nothing without a partner. You're not the knight in shining armor coming into a community telling them what they need. We met with church members, community members, and they affirmed that we think having people be aware of who we are on the East Side is a great place to create understanding. And there's sort of like the East Side gets a bad rap. And in full disclosure, I don't live in Defiance, and I knew very little about this this neck of the woods. But once I worked on this project for a couple years, my ears perked up to certain things. I had a colleague who said, yeah, the police stopped by my house and knocked on my door and told me my trunk of my car was open. But they said, don't worry, it's not like you live on the East Side. And so there were a number, over the 2 years I worked on this project, no judgment here, just that I learned a lot how this neighborhood is perceived by many people. One of the students one of my scholars who worked with me on this project still lives on the East Side. And she provided lots of insight to me for our group of what it was like living on the East Side for many, many years. So after we establish our community partners, how are we going to do it? How are we going to gather data about this neighborhood to learn more about them, to create awareness of their culture, who they are, where do they all come from? How did they all end up on the East Side? After we did all that, then we had to do the cognitive heavy lifting, where we reviewed the professional literature about storytelling, marginalized neighborhoods. We identified how are we going to get people to do what we're going to do, and what are we going to do? And what we decided to do is to interview people to create stories to tell us about how they got to the East Side, what was it like on the East Side, and how do they view the East Side. We collected data through the interview process, and we analyzed it doing grounded theory, which we'll talk about in a second. All McMaster projects have an academic focus, and there's mutual benefit. In community-based research, it's mutual benefit. Every side gets something out of it. Because the theory behind community-based research is if every partner doesn't get something from it, there's an imbalance of power. And that isn't what community-based research is about, equalizing that power structure. So our academic focus was community-based research, storytelling, and grounded theory. So I already told you quite a bit, I think, about community-based research. The students reviewed the literature, I reviewed the literature. Staker is one of the big names in community-based research. He's been around for a while, and he is like the gold standard for looking at community-based research. The picture in the upper left, we met the nicest people. This is one of my students. The husband and wife are off camera. And this was our first interview we set up. And so we get there and food everywhere, and we had already eaten by the time this picture was taken. So here we are, total strangers, these people on the East Side. And they came to the original meetings of why we're doing this. And then they invited us into their home to conduct, we did 3 interviews that day in their home. But first they made sure we had plenty of water and plenty of delicious, delicious food. Community-based research is huge in higher ed right now. And it has been for the last 10 years. And their experts will say it's in response to graduating students from a 4-year institution that have no idea about communities, they have no idea about world problems, and they have no idea of where do they fit in all this. So Jan Bechtel was at the college at the very beginning of this, and we called it service learning. So she was a real pioneer in this on campus, and it goes back pretty far on our campus. In 1921, the social work department sent a group of social work students to China to have some practical experience, 1921. So this is a long history. Jan was part of the rebirth on campus, and we went from service learning to really community-based research, where it's a pedagogy, where it's a way for us to teach content and to make sure our students are aware that they are global citizens and they might have some responsibility to the world. Storytelling, I picked this approach to the procedure and to the research because I studied the best approach to gather data for about 2 months before the project began, and learning what would the people, the participants in the community feel most comfortable with. Storytelling is huge in our world today. As historians, you all know this. Most of us, it took us a while to get there. But there are, like Georgetown University has a huge building that is just houses their school of storytelling. We use storytelling, like there were 7 students who joined me in this project and gathered data. And they were interested in this because one was wanted to go to dental school. And he said, well, why should I be on this project? And I said, you don't think you're going to have your patients tell stories about the state of their mouth? You don't think you're going to have to tell stories? And what we found out through the year is that every profession has a history now of storytelling. Even I just bought a car last May. This salesperson was telling me a story, told me a story. I know, Joanne, you haven't bought a car from 2005, and this is a big step for you, but let me tell you about my parents. And so he told me a story about how I should loosen up the change and buy this new car. Storytelling is really big in law school right now. It's really big in the criminal justice system, where we want people, we don't so much, when I talk to the people who work in that discipline, they are very aware of storytelling, and they want to train their employees to not so much interrogate, but get people to tell a story of what happened, you know, with success or not success. I have the link to this website. This is from the Desmond Tutu School of Human Connections. And they have created a toolbox for any organization, a toolkit who wants to use storytelling to find out more about their communities, who want to know step 1, step 2, step 3. This was a resource that was so helpful to me. And as historians, this sort of makes storytelling more accessible to the people who are going to tell us the stories in the community. And I highlighted in yellow the things that we focused on during the 2 years, that if we allowed the people on the East Side and they were willing to share their stories with us, we would become more connected. We would learn how to relate. And truthfully, it sounds like a cliche, but after we did the interviews and we met with all these people, my students said, you know, I don't know what the big deal is about the Eastside community. They're sort of like us. You know, that they love their families. They want to have a job. They want to have a decent place to live. They don't want a hole in the roof. And also we learned at this point that if we want to know about diversity of cultural traditions and cultural beliefs, rather than say, hey, what's your cultural belief? What do you believe about creation story? What do you believe about family structure? Let's ask people to tell me a story. Tell me a story about your family. And we practice this with our students. And this is what they always say. And this is what every participant said. Well, what do you want? What do you want us to say? And I would say, tell us anything about your family. Tell us anything about your family. And once we got going, these were intriguing stories. When we conducted interviews and we allowed the people to take the story where they wanted it to go, we found out and discovered so many things about that cultural heritage. One of the things I found out, which I wondered, is how did these immigrants all get to the East Side of Defiance? How did they get there? And that's for another story, but it is fascinating how they all got there. The biggest group that came, according to the families we interviewed, I think was in 1972 when the Lima GM plant closed. And now we had to move to Defiance, and Defiance, very few people would rent to these people except for people who owned houses on the East Side. And you know, the story lets us know the identity of people. This is a really good resource if anybody wants to use storytelling to find out about something in their local community that, like I eat lunch with Jan twice a week, and I'm always asking her, what's going on at the Tuttle? What's going on at the Tuttle? And she's got these great ideas. And like one of them she told me is, wouldn't it be interesting to find out where are what's behind the storefronts now, and what's been there over the years? Well, storytelling is ripe for this. You start finding people before they all pass away. What do you remember being here? What do you remember about the Hallmark store? What do you remember? I'm in Dayton right now, and I'm staying with Defiance. I'm staying with Wendy Schultz, who's from Defiance. And she was telling me when she was a young girl, they went to this place to eat in Defiance where they actually caught the fish out of the river. Now, I personally think that's a fascinating piece of history. And I said, well, where was that? And I said, I can't wait to tell Jan this. You know, she told me where these restaurants were, and it's all just conversation. We used grounded theory. To analyze the data. In any research process, if you gather it, you have to do something with it. You have to analyze it. And I made the executive decision that we were going to use grounded theory. Grounded theory was first established in the 60s, probably by a couple hippies at Cornell University. And what it is it has us look at people, it has us looking at evidence. It's ethnographic research. Ethnographic research is when we study people in their natural surroundings. So think, who am I thinking? Margaret Mead. Think Margaret Mead. She was the huge, the people who work at the Tuttle, they are ethnographic researchers. They are, if I had to go look in the dictionary and say ethnographic researchers, I have a picture of the Tuttle, because they spend their time, all of them, learning about the community by living in the community, gathering their data from the community. They're ethnographic researchers. Ethnographic research have to develop theory out of their data. And how they do it is, and how we did it. How we did it is we developed interview questions, and they're very open-ended. Tell us about your families, tell us about your relationships. And the one that a student suggested that I thought, I don't know, was the most popular question we asked. If the East Side were to disappear, what would be lost? What would be lost to Defiance City? These were heartwarming, touching, funny, sad stories that told their story. This is what you would lose in Defiance if we were wiped off the face of the earth. And so it ended up being a great question just for people to tell stories of the importance of that community. I'm gonna keep watching my time. Okay. So let me see where I am. We did work with our students on cultural competence because, quite frankly, except for one, we're a bunch of white people. And that was a roadblock to us. It was a roadblock to us because where we met and met our people was in a community that was almost all Hispanic, and who have been told things by people before. It was very difficult to even get an inch of trust, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. And so one of the things we had a grant. We went to Chicago and went to several immigrant neighborhoods that were very similar to the East Side, where we could be participant observers in an ethnographic. We decided it would be totally offensive and inappropriate for us to be walking around the East Side with notepads in our hand and referencing cultural icons, referencing graffiti. We didn't think we had that relationship with that neighborhood. So we looked at it first through some established immigrant communities in Chicago. It's funny, I had a student on the trip who said, my mom and dad took me to Chicago a lot. Their head would explode if they would see where you took us today. I said, well, you wouldn't visit this neighborhood? And they said, no, we never visited. We didn't know these neighborhoods existed in Chicago because they went down Michigan Avenue. They went down Michigan Avenue. They didn't see the richness of all these communities. And this girl said, I would like to take my parents here to show them what we learned today. So one of the things we had to do in a research study, we had to establish who our participants are. So we did a convenience sample. That means anybody we can find who will work with us, we will use. We didn't use random sampling. It was what was the easiest for us to get. So we had flyers, we had an ad in the paper, we had a couple meetings at the church. And I have to say that we did not have people rushing to us wanting to tell their story. They did not. It was very difficult for us. Our pastor Cantu was my right-hand man, and he kept saying, Jan, what do you expect? They don't know you. They don't know you. And it's not that these people weren't kind. The first time we met with them in the church for a meeting, and probably 50 people from the community were there, the church women made a meal for us. I mean, they were very welcoming, very nice. But that's the thing I learned. I've always learned about this kind of research is that to develop trust, to get information from particular communities, takes a lot of effort. We were in this project for 2 years, then COVID hit, and I have all this angst about because the college would not allow us to continue with this project because of COVID, and in Defiance, we are red. And so we can't be trooping around, going into people's homes, going into churches and interviewing people. So I'm trying to grapple with right now, how do I meet with Vitz Cantu and the mayor and saying, this is where we're at with this project. So the maybe 12 weeks before we shut down because of COVID, like the beginning of fall semester before we shut down, we started going to church. We started going to the Hebron ministries. Now, we didn't go in a bunch because I said, we thought, let's not overwhelm these people. So for 8 or 9 weeks, I had 2 volunteers a Sunday go and sit at a table at the church. They would go into the service, they would have coffee and donuts afterwards. And once that they saw us coming regularly and we actually spent our Sunday mornings with them, we started having people saying, yeah, I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you. So, we had like 12 people signed up for interviews. We had spring break and then we shut down. And so, and at that point we had gotten their names and their cell phone numbers. And because we called some of the people, but they didn't I don't blame them for hanging up. It sounds like a spam phone call. We were at your church and you said you would talk to us. And so we really had some problems with this.
Joanne, I'm going to break in to tell you have about 20 minutes left.
Okay. Thank you. This was an example of in the class. We met weekly as a class, the McMaster class. And because we could no longer analyze data from the interviews, because we did that already, I had the students every week talk about how COVID impacted them. And I wanted these students, before they left Defiance and went on to graduate school, I wanted them to know how to use grounded research. So they learned how to read what people had written. And in grounded theory research, what you do is identify themes. And so what the students did, if you see on the slide, we had 9 students and we had 46 writings. And the themes that emerged from college students in COVID was depression, sadness, hopelessness. And I remember this is March and April of last year, but that's what you do in grounded theory. In grounded theory, you look at your interview data and you keep going through it and you're saying, what do they have in common? What do all these things have in common? Well, my students were able to take these 8 weeks of writing in journals. I cut and pasted it so that everyone could read them. And then they identified themes and we were able to make generalizations about what's it like to be a college student at Defiance College during COVID. We're depressed, we're hopeless, and we generally don't like it. At that time in April, there was no silver linings being found by any of these students. Here's some raw data from our interviews. You want to take a look at them. And these people, we had permission to use it without their names. We all went under institutional review board training for confidentiality, and they signed off that we could use these. So here, these are some things that they said. And this is only just the tip of the iceberg. It was a time of my life. And this goes on for thousands and thousands and thousands of words. We learned in our brief period of time so much about the East Side. And we learned about this woman who just passed away this past year. Her name was B, and she owned a carryout. And we've learned that she was the person who helped people find housing. And for generations, she was a key figure in this community. And my community partner, Vince, said, you got to interview her before she passes away. Well, of course that happened. But there are so many people that have the story of B in their heads. How much time do we have, Betsy?
You were at about 15 minutes. So,
okay, let's break out and for 12 minutes. Let's be quick. And I want you to think, why is the preservation and dissemination of local history important? When you get to your breakout rooms, verbalize why it's important and hang on to some of the responses, because I'm going to quickly see what themes emerged. So we're a little bit rushed here, but I think we can do it, Betsy.
okay.
All right.
Rooms. All right, so you've all been invited to a breakout room, so you can join the room. Joanne,
Yes.
You are unassigned, but if you'd like to pop in and out of breakout rooms, I can talk you through how to do that.
Do I just click on the face?
So what you do is at the bottom of the screen, there's a, and those of you who are, this works for anybody, although Joanne can choose rooms, whereas the rest of you can't necessarily. At the bottom of the screen, there's a little breakout rooms tab towards the right-hand side. And if you click on that, it'll bring up a floating window.
Okay.
And it'll give you a list of the rooms and there'll be a little join next to it.
Okay.
And you can do that to pop between breakout rooms. So once you've joined one, I think you go back to the, I think you might need to come back to the main room in order to come back here, but in order to pick a different room, I think you have to come back here and then pick a different room, although I'm not 100% sure. I'm talking to myself. I need to stop